I'm going to introduce our Memorial University keynote for the conference this year. Very proud and pleased to introduce Dr. Jeannette Byrne. Dr. Byrne is an associate professor in the School of Human Kinetics and Recreation. Dr. Byrne is also 2018 recipient of the President's Awards for Distinguished Teaching. She has also recently yes. She's also recently began teaching in nursing studies, delivering a course to learners at the Center for Nursing Studies, Faculty of Nursing, and 3 satellite sites. The combination of love of both teaching and learning led Dr. Byrne to the academia, and those passions have influenced her work and how that work has changed throughout her career. She began, as many academics do, teaching as they've been taught. But as she progressed in her career, Dr. Byrne embraced innovative approaches in her quest to optimize the learning environments she creates in her courses. She doesn't want learners to simply strive for the best possible grade they can get. Instead, Dr. Byrne works to ensure her students are truly learning, understanding the material, becoming engaged, and being both challenged and supported in the classroom. As she will explain in her keynote presentation this morning, Dr. Byrne's learners have played a central role in her journey as an educator, and we saw that yesterday so much. She sees their relationship as a partnership, one guided by her core belief in the desire of all students to learn. Her role in that partnership, she says, is to create an environment that facilitates that desire. That can sometimes be a challenge to balance with the realities of grading. We know that. This morning, Dr. Byrne will share what she has learned about overcoming those challenges and facilitating student success, about how innovations, both large and small, play a pivotal role in her approach to teaching and learning. With that, I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Jeannette Byrne, this year Memorial's keynote for the Teaching and Learning Conference. Take it away, Jeannette.
Welcome to everybody that's here and everybody online. I've gotten quite used to teaching to people in the universe, so hi to the people online and welcome. So I'll share a little story. I like to share stories with students before I start. It helps to create that connection. So I have a 7-year-old, his name is Jacob, and I had to get him up this morning and out the door. My wife is out of town. So I got up and I got dressed. Wife approved clothing, so she approved it before she left. Then anyway, he'd finished his breakfast and I came out. I was all dressed. I said, Jacob, what do you think? Is it going to be good for my big talk? And he sort of gave me the look like a 7-year-old would, up and down. And he started to do this, but then he went like this. I was like, didn't quite approve it. So I'm hoping for a little bit more of a, either maybe a positive this or maybe even that. But then I came in and I was talking to Adrian and Darcy, and Adrian gave me the thumbs up. I don't know, is he gone? He gave me the thumbs up on my outfit, so that makes it better. So when it's really great to be here. This was supposed to happen last year. I'm actually kind of glad it didn't, because innovation is much more fun to talk about, for me anyway. So thanks for the invite. It's really great to be here. When I sort of started to think about what to talk about, it was a struggle. I didn't know how to do this. I didn't know what to say. And I very much approached it as the way I approach my teaching. My teaching is, with my course design and my classes, I try to tell my students a story of whatever it is we're talking about. So I decided to tell you guys a story of how I've gone from being a teacher who really focuses on delivering content to being a learning facilitator. And I swear, Avneet and I had no communication about that. So when she started to talk about that yesterday, I was like, yeah. And I very much think of myself now as a learning facilitator. So I'm going to share that story with you. And here's where we're sort of headed. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about who I am as a teacher and a learner, because context really does matter. It's very important. I'm going to share a little bit about the journey that I took, and then I'm going to sort of share where that journey ended. It didn't really end. It's still ongoing, and it was it wasn't a finite thing, but how I've started to shift the focus of my teaching to learning as opposed to just getting content out. And then just spend a little bit of time talking about the now what. So who am I? And this is very much who I am as a learner. So I am a lover of learning. I love figuring things out. I always have. Some of my earliest childhood memories, my dad was a teacher, or he worked with the school board, so we would travel a lot in the summer. We'd drive across we drove to Calgary like 3 times. It seems crazy now. And some of my earliest memories were him. We used to play Guess That Thing, right? And he would give us clues, and we'd have to figure it out. And some of my earliest memories were like some of the toughest ones he gave me. Like one time he was describing a cherry, like the fruit, and I couldn't get it. I still remember that experience of figuring, and when I finally guessed it, like 50 miles in or something. So I love learning and I love figuring things out. I absolutely love taking exams. It was almost my most favorite time of the year. Classmates would look at me and say, oh my God. But I love taking exams, right? An important context. And I've always been a teacher. I've loved teaching. I was the person in high school who would sit with my classmates and help explain stuff, and the person in university who would sit and help explain things. So that's who I am. I remember the very first university class I attended, or at least in my mind, it's the first university class. It was in the first old science building. It was a math class. It was a room sort of like this, although not quite as fancy. And there was an older gentleman, I wish I remembered his name, an older gentleman up front, graying hair, suit on. And as soon as he opened his mouth, I was like, I want to do that, right? I knew I wanted to do that. It took a long time. I dropped out of university and I hated university, and that's a whole other story. So it took a while, right? I eventually made my way to do an undergrad at Dalhousie. I worked for about 4 years in Lab City as a physio. And it was finally time to come back and pursue my dream to do what I'm doing right now. I headed off to the University of Waterloo. I did my master's and PhD in kinesiology, in particular biomechanics. So I'm a biomechanist, sort of by training. And then when I finished, I was really so fortunate, a chance encounter at a basketball game up in Hamilton with Dr. Baz Kavanagh. He said, come back to MUN, we have a position. It closed 2 months ago, but I'm going to talk to the provost who's over there, and yes, you can come and interview. And anyway, I made it back home. This is home for me. So I'm in the School of Human Kinetics and Recreation right now. My teaching context is this. Okay, so I teach anatomy and biomechanics. I also recently, as Kim was saying, started teaching in the nursing program. I teach anatomy and physiology at all 5 campuses, and that could be another talk in and of itself for what we've learned from that experience. A key to this is all of my courses are lab-based courses. Everything I teach has a lab, and I teach in the lab. I make a point of being in the lab for at least 1 lab a week so that I know what's happening and I know how things are working. So that's my teaching context. I have lots of support. I call them my learning facilitation team. One of my main lab instructors is up there in the back. But I have a learning facilitation team who helps me to facilitate learning in all of these lab courses that I teach. So this is who I am. I got the job. So how did I start? Well, I started teaching the way I had been taught and the way that I love teaching, which is I lectured, right? I loved it. The students seemed to like it. It's what I had been exposed to. And I assessed the way I had been assessed. Midterms, maybe an assignment here or there. There was lab reports because I had lab courses, and I had final exams. And I loved it, right? I was doing what I had dreamed of doing. And it was good for the first maybe couple of years, 3 years even. I came in ABD. So once I finished my PhD and then I was really 100% focused, I started to notice some things, okay? And one of the things I'm noticing is that the font here is quite small, so I need to get close to this so I can see it. Maybe it's better to even do this. So many students were not learning, and they weren't as excited about learning as I was. right? I had to understand everything. And my students weren't, some of them were, but my students weren't all like that. I should have known that, probably, but it didn't really sink in. For many of them, the focus was on avoiding that bad grade, right? Is this going to be on the test? What do we need to know for the test? They weren't engaged in that learning process. So I said, okay, this is clearly not working. I'm not engaging students in learning the way I was engaged in learning. So I started to do some research and some reading. Okay, so this is sort of where my journey began. And I focused on two areas, and I looked at the science of learning, and I looked at assessment methods. And this, again, wasn't a linear process. It was sort of all interwoven. And the science of learning stuff, I will say, again, I come from a biomechanics background. And when I first started to read the science of learning, I was kind of a little bit angry. Like, why haven't I been told anything about this in a PhD program? And I did a teaching and learning, like the program here at MUN. I can't remember what it was called at the University of Waterloo. That was 20 years ago now, but why haven't I even been made aware that there is such a science? I mean, I guess I should have known, but I didn't. So what I'm going to share with you now is just some tidbits of what I have learned, and most of this is not necessarily going to be new to most of you, but it will give some context to why I then started to make the changes to my teaching that I did. And I'm going to start with this textbook. So I'm going to present textbooks. I'm not presenting seminal research. I'm not taking a deep dive into the research. I'm going to share with you what spoke to me and what made me then start to dig a bit deeper and think a little bit more about how I was facilitating learning. So this textbook by James Lang, Small Teaching, if you haven't read it or seen it, I highly recommend it. So for those of you not familiar with it, each chapter essentially presents some technique or practice that's based on cognitive and educational science, so it's evidence-based. So these techniques or practices that we can use, they're designed to be quick and easy to implement, the idea being that each of these helps students become better learners. So Lang talks about a host of things. I'm going to highlight the ones that spoke to me, okay? So retrieval practice, that value of going back and retrieving that information. The more we can encourage students to retrieve information from their memory, the better they learn. Okay, really simple idea, but to see it on paper and to really realize the value. And he gives lots of ways you can do this, and I'll share some of the ways that I do it as well. Interleaving is that idea of intermixing study, how students are studying. So in biomechanics, for example, we may be studying how to calculate velocities and accelerations, and we may be studying how to calculate joint moments of force. So students could spend a night calculating velocities and accelerations, and then they could spend a night calculating moments of force. What interleaving suggests is it's better to do small batches of each and mix them, right? Because that's how the brain works. So that interleaving, connecting, that importance of encouraging students to make connections with previous information taught in the course, but also the importance of encouraging students to connect what they're learning to their lives. Okay, so we study friction in biomechanics. So I say to students, okay, I want you to think about what are some instances in your life where you purposely have to reduce the friction in your environment, and why do you have to do that? And what are some instances in your life where you have to increase friction, and why do you have to do that? So encouraging them to make those connections. So connecting is an integral and important skill that enhances learning. Distributed practice, right? Easy. It's way better to have a whole bunch of smaller study sessions spread over a longer period of time than it is to cram for an exam 3 days before. Right? That's the easy part of that. And explaining, right? The power of being able to speak out loud and explain to somebody else what it is that you're learning. A lot of research supporting this. I use it a lot. I've had students tell me, I explained the cardiac cycle to my cat, right? So it doesn't have to be a real person, right? It helps, but it doesn't have to be, right? It's just that, can you speak it? Because if you can speak it to someone else, you are learning it, right? So I knew a lot of these things, but it was just nice to have them reaffirmed. And, so, book number 1. There we go. This one by McGuire is not research-based at all. And I'm not saying that these are the best books to read about teaching and learning. These are the books that spoke to me. So when I happened to read this one, so this one is not research-based. McGuire writes the book based on sort of 20-plus years of helping students to become better learners. Okay? And several things in the book spoke to me. The most important thing for me was her discussion about the value of metacognition. I had never really heard about metacognition until I read this book, right? So that ability to think about thinking, that ability to assess how confident you are in your problem-solving skills, and are you aware of your learning process? This metacognition goes hand in hand with the reflection that we've heard many people in the conference talk about already. So that value, and I've since gone on and read a lot more about metacognition, but this is where I first realized its importance. The second two I was already doing and I was already aware of, but it certainly was helpful to see it written. So McGuire talks about the importance of setting a positive, learning-centric tone from day one, right? And then the second thing is the importance of explicitly, authentically, and regularly expressing your belief in student capabilities. Students need to know that we believe in them, that they can succeed. So I was already trying to do those types of things. This textbook helped, or this book helped me realize the need to be very explicit in how I do it. Okay, this is book number 2. This one, Grading for Growth, this is Clark and Talbert. So this is really a book about alternate grading and whatnot, and we'll talk about it a lot more in the next section. But I'm presenting it here because it highlighted for me the importance of feedback in learning. And I knew the importance of feedback in learning. But I hadn't really stopped and reflected on how I was using feedback. So in this book, they present feedback loop, and we all know this feedback loop, right? You do something, you get feedback, you think about the feedback, and then you make some changes. Anything that we learn based on feedback. Think about the last thing you learned. How did you learn it, right? You learned it by doing it, getting feedback either from someone outside or from your own body, right? If we're learning to do something physical, right, as a human kinetics person, we're getting feedback from our bodies all the time, right? My little 7-year-old, as he's learning a new skill when he first started to learn to ride his bike, it wasn't me saying, oh, don't do that. It was him getting feedback from his body, and his body using that feedback to learn the skill. So that feedback loop works. But if we really look at how we teach, are we truly using this loop? Or are we stopping it at the get feedback piece, right? Lab reports, tons of feedback, right? And my assumption was the students are going to take that feedback, they're going to read it, and they're going to use it to make the next report better. They're not doing that, right? And they're not doing it because they get the feedback. But by the time they get the feedback, they're already started on the next report. They got their grade. Their focus is now on the next. So really, I think about, are we truly creating these feedback loops? And I would challenge that some of us are, but most of us aren't. And this is how learning happens, right? So are we doing it? So we can improve learning, right? The science of learning tells us we can help improve learning by attending to small, everyday decisions that we make, right? About courses, about how we engage in the classroom, and about how we communicate with students. Okay? The research, like this is not something that we're, say it might work. The science of learning is very definitive. We can help learning by making some of these small changes. So, or some of them are not so small. So in the process of diving into here, I started to think about, okay, assessment has a role to play as well. And I had started to read some literature, and then this article, this is from Inside Higher Ed, popped up in my inbox. And I was intrigued, because who doesn't want to grade less? Because we don't like grading. I don't like grading. I'm assuming most of you don't like grading. So I went and took a look. And it wasn't what I thought. It was about this thing called ungrading. And it was alluding to the bad stuff about grades. So that led me to sort of dive into grades, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? There are some good things about grades, right? What are some good things about grades? Can anyone tell me some good things about grades? Anybody know any good things about grades?
I feel like they give you at least a good indication of the student's understanding. So it's like I could meet with a student who has failed an exam and really worked through, like, it's like, well, where can we build on? Where can we improve? Versus an A-plus student who just needs to be told that they did a good job. Both need validation with the experience.
Yeah.
I find in the courses that I teach that it is a good indication for that.
Okay, so an indication of understanding. Okay, all right, we're going to come back to that. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that. No, you're not probably wrong. There's no right or wrong. So grades are a great way for institutions to communicate, right? That's one thing they allow us to do. I kind of come back and look at my cheat notes here. Right, they help different schools communicate, right? So transfer credits, students leave here, our students go off and do physio and OT, and grades are important. So they allow for communication between schools. They give students a sense of where they're at in the course, which is part of what you might be alluding to, right? Students have a sense, right? They know what their grade is midway through, or 3/4 of the way through. So that's a good thing. They're the basis for the structure of most of our learning management systems, which is good, right? It makes us easy to use those learning management systems. Okay, and they're familiar to everybody, right? Students, parents, everybody knows grades. It's not a steep learning curve. So there's some good things about grades, but there's some bad things about grades. Okay, grades tend to make students less likely to take risk. Right? We've all heard students talk about that's the easy A. Right? That's not taking a risk, right? I'm going to take the easy A. Right? I don't want to take a more challenging course because that's risky. It goes down deeper than that, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. It promotes a fear of failure, and I'm going to talk about fear a lot later, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. It reduces the quality of student thinking. What's on the test? That's what I'm going to focus on. I'm not going to go deeper because I don't need to. What's on the test? It contributes to anxiety and poorer health, right? The mental health issues in society, but in students in particular, right? I had so many students this year defer exams for mental health reasons, more than ever before. Grades are not the only problem, but they're not helping. And they are associated with increased academic dishonesty, right? So if you look at all of those things, right, we want the opposite to be happening, right? We want students to be comfortable taking risks. We want them to not be afraid to fail, because that's how most of us learn, right? So grades are not great. This is not new, right? This is not new stuff. We've known this for a long time. But grades don't bother some students. Grades didn't bother me, although I was driven by the extrinsic motivation of the grade, but I did need to understand. But there are some other sort of bigger picture things that grades do as well, right? They have inconsistent meaning, right? We assume an A is an A is an A is an A, but it is not. As much as we try to make it consistent, it is not consistent. They don't provide any valuable or meaningful feedback, right? And there's research that shows that if there's a grade on it and there's written feedback, then they'll look at the grade and they'll ignore the potentially valuable feedback. They misrepresent learning, false positives, right? We've all had those students ace the test, but when they're sitting in your office talking to you, there's clearly a disconnect there. They don't really get it. And there's the false negative, right? The C student doesn't do well on the test, but they can sit down and have an amazing conversation with you about their understanding, but they just don't do well in tests. They're not equitable. And Clark and Talbert talk about this in Grading for Growth a lot. Right? Equity is, does everybody in the class have equal access to all of those learning opportunities? Right? And grades preference the students who either learn faster, play the game better, come to the class with more background knowledge for whatever reason, right? Not to mention some of the biases that are associated with things like granting extensions or extra credit or participation grades, right? So there's a lot of really not great things about grades, but yet we keep using them until, now there's always been some people who don't use grades, but COVID made us all stop and really think about, what are we doing here? How do we assess these people, right? And really re-examine how we're assessing, which has sort of led to this explosion of alternate grading, right? Cohen has said if faculty would relax their emphasis on grades, it might serve not to lower standards, but to actually encourage an orientation toward learning. That's what we want. That's what we're about, better learning for everybody. But yet we have this thing called grades, which is totally counter to that. It's doing the opposite of learning. So that, oops, I keep pointing there, but I need to point there. So that really shifted me towards exploring this thing called alternate grading. And what is alternate grading? I mean, alternate grading is grading that differs from what we traditionally do, right? And the traditional is sort of multiple, sometimes higher stakes assessments. There could be assignments, there could be lab reports, and a key is there's minimal opportunity for revising or resubmission, okay? Ungrading by Susan Bloom was the book I stumbled onto. And then Jesse Stommel, this is his, he has a blog. So those two were sort of my introduction to ungrading. Talbert and Clark, the Grading for Growth, just came out in 2023, so it's a relatively new one on the scene. But these two really opened my eyes and made me think, wow. The other helpful one here was there's a grade, it's called The Grading Conference. It's an online conference, and I stumbled into that one. It's in 2022, I think. If you haven't been and you have an interest in this stuff, I encourage it. So what is alternate grading? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I will just very quickly. There's sort of three broad categories of alternate grading. And these are not sort of in their own little silos, right? You tend to mix and match, and you'll see that I mix and match when I use them. So specifications-based grading, essentially the instructor provides a list of very specific specifications that the student must meet in completing these. This type of grading is usually used with assignments or essays or portfolios. And there's only one of two grades. It's either successful or not quite there yet. Okay? And if it's not quite there yet, they get lots of feedback, make the changes, and now is it successful? You can keep going in that loop, but it's not desired. I tend to, they get one chance, and then if that's not successful, then we have a conversation about what potentially the grade would be. Standards-based grading, labor-based grading, and contract grading are sort of types of standards-based grading. But standards-based grading, the course is broken down into a set of standards that the student must meet, right? The standards you can think of as sort of types of learning objectives, but they're not quite the same. And depending on the number and the mix of objectives that they meet, the student can decide, do I want an A in this course or a B or C, right? So they have some control over deciding ultimately what grade they want. Okay, this is the one I'm not using, so I'm least familiar with. Ungrading is, or the name is starting to be called collaborative grading. So ungrading is, as the name suggests, there's no grade. Here's your whatever it is back. Here's your feedback, and there's no grade. And when a grade is needed, that is decided collaboratively between student and instructor, either in an individual meeting, if you have a nice small class, or the way I do it, through a formal reflection, learning reflection. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But there's no grade. Okay, there has to be a grade at the end because we still have to submit grades, but the work is not associated with the grade. Okay. So, my journey, where has it led me? So, I now focus on my course design, right, and my assessment decisions. Got to put my glasses on because I can't see. Right, so it's led me to focus my course design and assessment methods on methods that have been shown to enhance learning. So learning is the center of everything. Right? Not what is the content I have to deliver, how do I focus learning? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share I'm going to talk about two courses, very, very briefly, just to show you how I've used this. But before I do that, I'm going to share with you something else that I've learned. So I learned this. This was something I came across first. I listened to a David Clark keynote, so Grading for Growth guy. Lindsay Maslin in the grading conference keynote also talked about it. She called it grading values. But Clark asked the question, what are the fundamental principles that guide every decision you make in your teaching? What are they? Okay? So I reflected on that. What are my fundamental principles? I trust students. Okay? I would say stolen this from Jesse Stommel. He has a similar one, but it's who I am. I trust students. I trust them. And I'll talk about the implications of that later. The second thing is I believe that all students want to learn. Every single person that is in my classroom wants to learn. They may not want to learn exactly what I think they should learn or in the way I want them, I think they should learn, but they want to learn, right? And these guide all my decisions. Okay, so let's look at the first course. So this is the most recent one. So this was last fall. This is a course that all our second-year students take. It's gross anatomy. They have to learn all the muscles and joints and bones in the body. And I totally took this course and went boom and said, we need to make this about learning. Okay? So why did I do it? And the why question is important. I ask my students the why question a lot, and I'll encourage you to ask the why question. The why question is important. The answer to the why question tells you what do you need to do and how do you need to do it. So the why for me for this course, it's a very heavy content course. It's a fall course. I teach the same group of students in the winter. Many of them in the winter had no idea what we did in the fall, right? It's a foundational course for our kinesiology students. They really need the content. And I tried a lot of other stuff, and it wasn't working. So I did this. So what did I do? I put learning at the center. Learning is at the center. I built in metacognition. There's reflections there. I'm helping them think about how they learn. I talked to them about how to learn, the learning to learn piece. I gave them some skills. I helped them make connections with some of the assessments that we did. It's easy with anatomy. We're talking about the biceps. It's here. It does this. You can feel it, right? But I talked about that. We did retrieval practice almost every single class. And it wasn't retrieval practice to what we did yesterday. It was retrieval practice to maybe what we did a week and a half ago. Just 5 minutes, right? And I had some meaningful assessments, which we'll talk about. So here's what it looked like. So I wanted to shift the focus from grades to learning. So how did we do that? So I'll focus on 3 of these. So quizzes. So there was 4 quizzes in the course worth 5 marks each. Students could redo the quiz. Did it the first time. I think 80 was my cutoff. Right? Didn't get to the 80. They could redo it another time. Why? Well, the first quiz, that's feedback, right? They see where they went wrong. They can go back. They can review it. They can revise. You do it again, right? Have you learned it? I don't care when you learn it. Have you, at the end of that process, have you learned it? So yes, they could only do it twice. Okay, and they got the higher grade. If they got lower on the second one, it didn't matter. They got the higher grade. Okay, there was 2 assignments, an upper limb assignment and a body map assignment. These were both specifications graded, right? So they submitted it. It was either successful, they had very specific things they needed to have there, or it wasn't quite there yet, and I gave it back to them. Okay? I built some reflection in. There was a final reflection that they did in this course, thinking about their learning. What did they learn about themselves as learners? Okay, we had labs. I changed the lab assessment to an oral lab assessment. We'll talk about that later. So I'm going to show you some of the projects that I got. Okay, because this was amazing. So the first project was the body map project. I wanted, one of the learning goals in this course is for students to at least have a general idea where all the muscles are in their body. So this was a brand new assignment, a body map assignment. So you have to create something to hand in at the end of the semester that shows me all of the muscles on the body. So here are some of the options. I've got permission from students to do this. So it helps that this is a fall course, so there's lots of Halloween skeletons around. They did not have to use Halloween skeletons. Okay, so this person used yarn. Every muscle is, like, they are learning the muscles when they do that. Way more than a multiple choice question. This one here, the person crocheted. Okay, now this is just an arm because she would still be, she's going to be 60. She says, I'm going to finish it, but she's going to be 60. It's a lot of work. She knows the anatomy of the upper limb after doing that, right? And there's a couple more. There's a whole bunch of different iterations. I think I had 5 out of 80 that weren't quite there yet, and they had to come back with something else. Okay? The second assignment that I had, another thing that's really important for students to know in this course is the relationship between where a muscle attaches and the action it does, which we do in the lab and we try to explain, but it's very hard to conceptualize. So they had to create a model. I see some of you looking at this. It's like, why are we looking at here? These are upper limbs. That's your shoulder blade. That's your humerus, your upper arm bone, and the strings there those are muscles. And they had to be able to pull the muscle and create the movement. And there was a reflection associated with this. What challenges did you have? What did you learn from those challenges? It was fun to read those reflections. Okay? But again, if there was a grade associated with this, it's a totally different experience for them. They could just have fun and explore, and right, without the fear of I'm going to fail. The final piece, which I haven't really talked about, is how I use the syllabus to sort of set that learning-centric tone and to create that relationship, to start to create that relationship with students. So this is small. I'll just read out a few little bits. So I always have in my syllabus what you can expect from this course, AKA, what are my commitments to you as a course instructor, right? I'm going to challenge you, but I'm going to support my learning facilitation team are going to support you. So you're going to be challenged, but we're going to support you. The course is going to be filled with meaningful learning experiences, not busy work. I'm committed to helping you become better students. I'm going to expose you to that research about learning. A course design that tries to encourage understanding, right? I don't want you to memorize, I want you to understand. And the last piece is most important, right? Respect. So I respect you as a learner, I respect you as an adult, I respect you as a human, right? Again, just seems simple, but we're establishing that relationship, that connection. I value you for who you are. And then I tell them how to succeed. And I tell them I believe every single one of you can succeed in this course if you do the following things. Read the syllabus. Be actively engaged in the learning process. Apply the course content to the world around you. That's encouraging them to do those connections. Stay up to date on the course. Be willing to consider a different way of learning. So I'm telling them right up front, the way you're learning may not be the most effective. But I'm going to give you some tools. If you wish to try and change that, I'm going to support you. Okay, and this is from, I've taken these and adapted them from Robert Talbot. Okay, I'm just going to go quickly. These are just some quotes from CEQ. So what did I learn, right? Because this is sort of my learning journey as well. They really did facilitate deeper learning. We saw it in the labs. The students were engaged in talking anatomy in the labs when they normally aren't. Okay? The way the evaluations were graded promoted positive learning and knowledge rather than the rinse and repeat way of learning. Right? Students are creative. They love expressing their creativity. Right? I really liked how you focused more on learning the material rather than memorizing it for a quiz. The redo quizzes. One student said, I thought the redo quiz was just going to be about an easy grade. Right? But then I realized going back and looking at the content again, I learned it better. The retrieval practice was a hit. Right? The recall techniques used at the beginning really helped me. And they saw the benefit, and they started to use it in other ways. Okay? I'm going to skip the lab assessments for now, just because in interest of time. So that's 2310. That's a new one, which I'm going to keep tweaking. 4703 is advanced biomechanics, so our students are in their last semester before they graduate. And this was my big experiment with ungrading. I started it in 2021, I think. So we were virtual, we were online, but we did it, and we're still doing it. So why did I make these changes? So up until this point, this was a very traditionally graded labs. There was 4 labs. Each lab was worth 10 marks. They'd hand it in. We'd give them lots of feedback. They'd get a grade. They'd do the next one, right? It was very traditionally graded labs. I'm just going to talk to you about the lab component of this course. Labs are key learning components. It's a capstone course of sorts for us. I encourage students to integrate their knowledge and focus on how they can communicate that knowledge. This is also a very unique course. We have a cohort of biomedical engineering students who join us. So it was that very rich peer learning opportunity for the two groups to learn from one another. Students were not doing well on the labs. Right, there'd be tears and anxiety and panic, and it just wasn't working. I'd made lots of changes, and I couldn't create the labs in a way that enabled them to meet the learning objectives. So ungrading happened. Okay, I'm going to go through this really fast. So essentially, students come in. They do the lab like they always do it. They do a lab report. They hand it in. Me and my learning facilitation team read it. We do not grade it. We keep track of misconceptions that the students have. There's no feedback on individual lab reports. We keep track of misconceptions that the students have related to the answers. Okay? I create a group class feedback document. Here's the general misconceptions that people had on this lab. Okay? They all get that. They come back into the lab again, and we do lab part 2, where they, in their groups, do the questions again. Engage in that learning. You can imagine there's 5 or 6 people in a group. They all have slightly different ideas. They have to figure that out to get to the answer, using their feedback, using my work and the work of my learning facilitation team. Really rich learning environment, okay? At the end of that process, we do spend some time. Here's what the answers are. We want people to make sure they know the answers, okay? And then when that's over, they do a reflection, which I read and provide individual feedback on. Okay, not a grade, just individual feedback. So where does the grade come from? Labs are worth 40% of this course. At the end of all of this, they do one final reflection, a guided reflection. What did you learn? What were some of the challenges you faced? What was your biggest aha moment? All of those types of things. They suggest a grade. I have a grade based on my observations, and they're usually pretty close to what my suggested grade is. Oftentimes they underestimate. Right, so the key learning features, we got rid of grades, which was the big thing impeding the learning in these labs. Okay, we have lots of feedback with the opportunity to use the feedback. Lots of collaborative learning and interdisciplinary collaborative learning, because we have engineers and kinesiology students. And that metacognition piece. Okay, so what did I learn? There was no more tears. There was no more panic. There was no more anxiety. Okay, and I'll clarify this. There was initially, there can be initially, because this is very different. Students are used to knowing exactly where they stand. And now all of a sudden you have this lab and you don't get a grade. And there's that initial fear. I, as a student, I know I would have been, what do you mean you're not going to tell me what my grade is? How do I know what I'm, right? So there's that initial. So when I first offered it, yes, and I've gotten better at explaining it and reassuring them and those types of things. So that is starting to lead. Providing feedback to students without a grade is infinitely more enjoyable, right? You're not sitting there like, is this a 23 or a 21, right? How many, right? And by the time you're grading 80, right, the first one and the last one, as much as we try, probably not the same. But now you just get to sit and read it and enjoy learning what they're learning. It's way more fun, okay? It's way more fun. It's still not, it's not the most fun thing in the world to do, but it's relative, right? It's way more fun than traditionally graded labs. Okay, I've got some quotes from students now, and these have all, I've got 3 or 4 that I've asked for specific permission, and some of these are also from research that we've done. Reflection, metacognition did reflect learning. Okay? Previously, I might have viewed mistakes or misunderstandings as setbacks, but now I see them as pivotal learning opportunities. This reflective practice has become a crucial part of my learning toolkit. Right? So this student not only used the practice in this course, but they've started to use it in other courses. Like, wow, that's right, that's what we want. That's what we want. They're transferring it. They're going to take it with them. Students really benefited from the collaborative learning. Group work. And a lot of students say, I hate group work. But they don't hate group work. What they hate is that group work is associated with the grade. And they're not in control when it's in a group. It's very stressful, right? But when you remove the grade, right, done this way, it feels like collaborating in the workplace, where all ideas are important rather than trying to rush through a group project to yield the highest score. Right? I discovered that discussing material with others and listening to other people's thoughts and opinions is the best way for me to better understand. Right? Learning in groups tends to help make material more memorable rather than sitting alone at my desk reading a textbook. Here's the fear and the pressure. This came up a lot, okay? And when I read this one, I was like, wow. I had always erroneously believed that I did not respond well to challenges. So this is a graduating student, his whole university career. I do not respond well to challenges. But it turns out it was the pressure I didn't respond well to, right? Things that are challenging are associated with long, strenuous struggle and studying and a bad grade, right? In this class, I was given the opportunity to welcome challenge as an abundance of pressure was removed. I was able to push my limits without fear of failure. I wish I had known this throughout my academic career, as I could have challenged myself and learned more. When I read these, like, I would have tears in my eyes sometimes. We've done a disservice to this student, right? They've got it now, they got it, but they could have gotten it earlier. Here's another one. I'm usually a solo learner. Several talked about this. I keep to myself because I'm afraid of being judged for being stupid or dumb. I don't say anything. because I don't want it to be wrong. It turns out, however, given the right environment, it's okay to be wrong. That's the biggest part of learning. When our small group learning in labs, I would say that I was wrong 60% of the time because some of the topics were challenging, but I have learned to value that. However, I came out with a better understanding 100% of the time. That fear is getting in the way for so many of our students. It was getting in the way for me, right? I was afraid to start this. It was something new, something different. Fear is real, and it's really impacting how our students learn. We need to provide students with the opportunity to do hard things in safe environments. Right? So everything is instant now, right? Don't know the answer, Google it. Right? So in these labs, we closed technology, old school. Students sat at a table, we had a big sheet of paper, and they all had markers. Right? Just to remove that tendency to Google. The feeling you get when you realize you have solved a difficult problem alone without anyone just feeding the answer to you is an amazing feeling and something that should be incorporated more. I know what I felt like when I figured out that the answer was the cherry. Students don't often get that opportunity because the answers has to be instant, and they have the ability to get those instant answers. We need to give them the opportunity to practice struggling and being okay with struggling and having that aha moment. Students are just amazing. The first quote is from the very first year I did this. And I always get emotional when I talk about this one. The student said, "I found my voice." This is a fifth-year student, or fourth-year student, who has been in our institution and did however many credit hours, I don't know. They're graduating, and they just found their voice. Imagine how different the learning experience for that student would have been if they had found their voice in semester 2 or semester 3. I think back to my learning. I didn't have a voice in university. How different? How different would the learning be? I found my voice. I can do hard things. I can't do it. Their go-to is I can't do it. This student said I can. I can do hard things. I'm committing to myself to practice patience and empathy with myself and even others. Right? This experience taught me that despite everyone around me, right, seeming to somehow, I lost my place, seeming they were somehow better off than me, right? They were more educated or more intelligent or more confident. They realized I'm doing myself a disservice by thinking that. I'm just as good as everybody else. So I'm committing to myself to practice that sort of empathy and confidence with myself, with my peers, and with my colleagues. Powerful, powerful stuff that goes way, like we were studying advanced biomechanics, right? As hardcore sciencey as you can get. Powerful things that students were able to learn when we remove the grade. Most of this is because the grade wasn't there. They didn't have to worry about the grade. So they had and we provided the opportunity for reflection, metacognition, so they could come to these realizations. And this one. I genuinely thank you for challenging the traditional methods and for making me realize learning is actually so much fun. So many students said, I forgot how much I enjoyed learning, how much fun learning was. I'm excited about learning again. I had lost that. Right? And if they're excited about, they're going to keep learning. Right? And that's what we want, right? We want to graduate lifelong learners. So it's powerful. And you can see why reading these things is not like traditional grading at all. It's fun. So now what do we do? I always find attending these keynotes, you leave and you've heard so many things, or conferences in general, right? You've heard so many things, you've got all kinds of ideas, and then you walk out through that door, and once you get back to your office, and you turn on your computer. It happened to me yesterday. I left the keynote here, I had to go back to my office for something, and I looked at my email. And I was gobbled in that hole for half an hour before I could come back. Right? So we leave, so what do we do? So I think it's 5 suggestions, it might be 4. Don't get caught up in the definition. So if you're thinking about making some changes, don't get caught up in the definitions. Okay? That they really confused me initially. Figure out what the answer to your why question is. Right? Why do you want to change? Right? The why will then lead to the what, which will lead to the how. So the why is at the middle. What is or are your fundamental principles? Right? I trust students. So yes, there's flexible admission or flexible due dates. Yes, you can have an extension. Yes, you can have a deferred exam. Now, it's not just free-for-all, right? There's guidelines and things set up right at the beginning, but there's flexibility. I trust students, and they know that I trust them. And I ask that they ask the same of me. They trust me as well. My second one, all students want to learn. Right? So I have to create, with my team, create that environment that enables them to learn to the best of my ability. Right? And that is now my focus, the learning. Right? And it's a shift. Right? With the anatomy course, I often found myself, the grades are going to be higher. And I was like, this is not about the grade. This is about the learning. Let's get the learning right. Okay, so what are your fundamental principles and what is your context? Okay, I've adapted this from Lindsay Maslin. As I said, she was a keynote speaker at the grading conference last year, right? Where you're somewhere in where's that star for you? It's going to be different for all of us, right? Partly because our principles are different, but also our context is different. I'm a tenured faculty member. Right? I teach in a relatively small school with a very supportive administration. I've got a fabulous learning facilitation team. I have a wife. I am a mom of a fabulous 7-year-old. I have aging parents, taking care of a mom who has dementia. That's my context. It's even course contextual, right? I also teach the course I teach in nursing. I cannot do a lot of these things in nursing. The context is different. It's bigger. There's more regulations about everything has to be the same. So context matters. But in that nursing course, I do small things. Right? I still have my principles, but I just can't make the big changes. So what is your context? Right? What are your pedagogical principles? And how does that then fit? And what's doable for you? Be authentic to who you are as a teacher. That's so important, and students really value that authenticity. We all bring different things to the classroom and to our students. Be authentic. So I'll leave you to read this and just comment on the fact that about 2 days before I finished this, so I was the CITL's memo came out, and I thought it was a new vision and a new mission, so I'm glad you clarified that. But what this is all about is, in fact, better learning for all. Right? We each have a role to play. It's exciting to see where CITL is going, that BLI, I can't remember what it stands for now, right? But we're moving as an institution to this, let's bring learning back to the center of what we're doing. I think we all have a role to play. Our roles will all be different. We'll all make different types of changes, different types of tweaks, depending on our context, okay? I never teach my pupils. I only attempt to provide the conditions in which they can learn. So there's a story here. This is me being me. So I was telling my little 7-year-old, was really nervous about this talk. He said, "Mommy, I'll draw you a picture." So when I picked him up yesterday, he said, Mommy, I didn't draw you a picture, but Madame Young let us do coloring, and I colored this very special picture for you. So I told him, I'm going to show everybody this. Okay? So this is the picture that Jacob colored for me. He was very, very concerned that everybody see the doorknob. So there's a doorknob on the doghouse, right? We haven't had the discussion about dogs not having fingers yet. All right. There we go. I'd love to have a chat and a conversation if you have questions or comments.
So that was wonderful, thank you. My mind always goes very much to practicalities. Mm-hmm. So, how many people are in your learning facilitation team, and how many, average
Yep.
for, one of these courses, non-contact hours are they needing to put in to do the, develop the personal feedback, provide the personal feedback?
So, yes, so the practicalities are important. So I would say in creating, so let's look at the anatomy. Let's look at the anatomy piece. There's no real additional hours in the anatomy piece. Save for that resubmission of project. The quizzes and whatnot in anatomy are all done in Brightspace. So, but they're done in the classroom because they're the type of topic content. It's multiple choice. So it's Brightspace in the classroom. So there's no grading there. The additional pieces would be that resubmission of the project. They tend to be fairly low. So I think out of 80 last fall, I had 5 or 6. They're not taking a whole lot of time. So the anatomy one is not extra non-contact hours. 4703, the advanced biomechanics. At the end of the day, there is, I'm still tweaking it. So there is I would say there's 10% more maybe than originally, because originally I would have had labs that I had to mark, traditionally grade, which takes way more time than reading something and providing some meaningful feedback. So there's a trade-off there, right? There's a trade-off between the time it takes to traditionally grade versus the time it takes to really skim something quickly and provide feedback, because it's fairly easy reading. It's always harder when you're first starting out, right? So the first year I did ungraded, I was sort of developing everything on the fly. So that took a lot of time. Now that it's up and running, 10% more, that's a guess. For me, it's worth it. It's not the same type of work. It's not, it is hours, but it's not the same type of work. And again, you don't have to go all in, right? So I teach another course, a lower year course, and we've done 2 labs that we're doing ungraded, right? So you don't have, it doesn't have to be all of them. For this course, it worked. So yeah, there are those practicalities.
No, sorry, I was meaning more for your...
Oh, for the students?
For your learning facilitation team.
Oh, the learning facilitation team? So my learning facilitation team is just me and my lab instructor and TAs. It was the same before and it's the same now. So in advanced biomechanics, I have a lab instructor and 1.5 TAs. So what I would always have. They have no extra work. In fact, if anything, their jobs are easier because they're not grading either. They're reading and providing meaningful, not providing feedback. They provide the feedback to me about misconceptions. So there is no extra work on them. So if anything, I would say their job is potentially more enjoyable because they're not grading, right? Yeah.
My turn. Thank you very much for that inspiring presentation. It really makes me think about ways we might apply this. Like my colleague, I'm being an engineer, focus on practicalities as well. And in my case, being a university administrator, the regulations come to mind. And the interaction between trying to be innovative in your practice of teaching and the regulations that say thou shalt give 20% of the grade, for example, by a given date, and those sorts of things. Can you speak to? I'm not sure you should give away the trade secrets of how you get around them, but what's the impact? And maybe there's a longer discussion about what should we do?
So my dean is not here, and my colleagues who are here will just forget. I just ignore it, and I haven't been called out. No one has asked. Students don't ask because again, we've established that relationship, and they know I have their back. They know if I see them struggling, right? So the other thing that I didn't say. As students are handing in labs, if they're going down the wrong road, right? If they're not doing the work they need to do to learn and to show me that they've learned, then I will reach out to them and say, okay, we need to have a meeting. So they will know if they're in peril in the lab portion of the course. And I think by establishing that relationship, they trust. They trust that I have their back, and I'm not going to let them go down that wrong road. So. I just pretend it doesn't exist. And now I'm in trouble because this is going to be everywhere, so.
So you have your other course components that may come in.
There are, yes, so there are some other course components. For 4703, there isn't anything really that happens that's of any substantive amount of coursework that would give that 20%. In the anatomy course, yes, we have labs and there's other things. So this is really just the advanced biomechanics course where they don't have that 20%. I mean, I guess if I was pushed to do it, I could get students to do sort of a midterm reflection where they suggested their grade out of 20. That would be a way to get around it, but that's in my mind, creating unnecessary work for students and for me. And that's not the principle. I trust students, I want them to learn. I don't necessarily want their learning to be impeded by me having to comply with regulations. But if I have to, I will.
Thanks, Jeannette. That was amazing. Just a two-part question, actually. You talked about how you're doing the nursing now this year, and so it hasn't been totally transferable for you to take this new approach or your new approaches into that context. I'm just wondering, A, how you square that for yourself, because you talked a lot about how this is you, and B, is it transferable now that you're in another context and rather than just HKR, do you see opportunities where this can be applied to in nursing or any other context as well?
Absolutely. Like this can be applied to anything. Like some of the ungrading started out very much in the arts and literature and whatnot, but it's STEM, like grading. The Clark and Talbot are mathematicians, right? So there's a huge use of it in math. So it's absolutely transferable. The challenge in nursing is just more administrative. So there's 6 sites, and in an effort to ensure that the student experience is the same. They have some fairly specific regulations about all of the sites teaching the same things, having the same evaluations, those types of things. So those are the limitations I'm speaking. It's not specific to nursing. I would love to be given full rein to say, hey, do this. But we're working on it. So how do I square that with my fundamental principles? Again, this is context, right? So I do everything that I am able to do to make this as positive a learning experience as I can, right? We've removed substantial grades from the labs because I want the labs to be about learning, not about grades, right? We've added a project in the hopes of making it a little bit, helping them to connect a little bit more. We talk to them a lot about how do you learn? What are some of those learning strategies that you can use? So I do what I can in that context, and that's That's the importance of that context. It won't necessarily be the same for every single course.
So, Jeanette, that was excellent. I just thoroughly enjoyed that talk so much. So I'm actually within the nursing
Yes,
faculty.
you are.
We've briefly met recently. So I'm within those confines of all the regulations. We know that we need our accreditations, professional program. I'm teaching some theory courses in the undergraduate, which I absolutely love. And I'm trying to bring in, because the more I'm teaching in theory, the more I'm like, nursing students, we're kinetic people, we're doers. So I'm trying to bring in a lot more like just brain activating activities. And I just wonder like how you would recommend that approach for like a heavy theory course, like, because that's something that I'm still trying to navigate, and just to get learners really, really activated and active participants, say in a course that they don't necessarily want to be in, like nursing research.
So I mean, for me, the big thing is trying to find that connection, trying to help them find that connection and see the value. So for nursing, I mean, it's linking, you say you're talking about research, so linking the value of them knowing research back to their actual ability to practice as nurses, right? So trying to help them see that connection. Why is it important that you as nurses know research? I can see lots of opportunity for like sort of small group type of, we do a lot of small group learning activities. I didn't say in my talk, but I don't lecture near as much anymore. We take a day every week to just do small group learning activities where case study based, right? Here's a nursing case, and how does the research help inform necessarily what you do? I mean, I don't know nursing well enough. I know A&P, but not nursing well enough to give you specific examples. But just creating that opportunity for them to really engage and discover the importance of research for their own, because you can tell them all you want, right? But until they sort of experience that themselves, that really doesn't, you telling them doesn't necessarily mean as much. Yeah.
Thank you very much.